Chris Hummer, 247 Sports and CBS Sports, joins us on the show. Chris, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. So a little news today, a few news and notes in the transfer portal. Can you tell us much about Calvin Simpson-Hunt from Ohio State, was recruited, committed to Tech, ended up at Ohio State, and now part of Baylor secondary?
Yeah, I mean, first thing I'd say is he's from Waxahachie, Texas, my hometown. So shout out to the Indians. But he was a really talented player. He was a high 4-star recruit out of high school, top 100 guy. He's one of the fastest players in the country, really. He's recorded multiple sub 10, 7, 100-meter times. He's somebody that couldn't break through in a really deep Ohio State backfield the last couple of years, or defensive back room. But when you talk about raw clay, he is as good as it gets in the country at that position. And I think especially in the Big 12, he'll be very successful. He immediately brings speed, plays the ball well, and Dave Aranda has a good track record with DBs. So I think it's a really nice pickup. The Bears have done a really nice job in the portal this cycle.
Who do you think, now that the dust is mostly settled and there's not really any big, gigantic, I mean, there's going to be a couple of the Notre Dame linemen, and I know some other people might pop up. Who do you think's team is at least the most you can tell definitely improved? Because the portal is a very, very inexact science. There's
no question about that. You're talking about nationally, I assume?
Yeah.
I think LSU has had the best portal class. I don't think there was an area that LSU had a hole in that it didn't get better at. They had probably the best center in the transfer portal coming over from Virginia Tech and Braylon Moore. They got maybe the best interior lineman in the transfer portal and Josh Thompson from Northwestern, 2 of the best receivers, a couple impact corners, an impact tight end, and Donovan Green, if he's healthy, coming over from Texas A&M. In addition to Bauer Sharp coming over from Oklahoma at that room. So they got better there. Basically, if there was a hole around Garrett Nussmeier, it improved. I haven't even mentioned the edge takes they had. They had Patrick Payton, the number 1 edge player in the portal for us in our rankings, coming over from Florida State. Jack Pyburn coming over from Florida, who's a multi-year starter from them. Somebody who defends the run really well. LSU had to get better this offseason under Brian Kelly, and I think they made a concerted effort in a way we haven't seen before in attacking the portal, and I think it really paid off.
Chris, one of the other moves that just kind of stood out to me, I guess, as this started to trickle down, but post-national championships, Devin Brown heading over to Cal. They obviously lost their very good quarterback to the portal themselves, but any thoughts as the clarity hits that Ohio State crowded quarterback room?
Did you know that most calorie deficit calculators don't work? My dietitian recommended the Lasta to me, and it turned out to be the only one that got my calorie deficit right. Thanks to it, I lost 14 pounds in 1 week. Ready to kickstart your journey to healthy weight loss? Calculate your ideal calorie deficit using the Lasta app right now.
Yeah, Julian Sand's going to be their guy. It would be a shock if it wasn't moving forward. I think the majority of kids in that room have kind of understood that and where that was going. Lincoln Kienholz is still there and will compete this spring, but it'd be a surprise if it wasn't Julian Sand's job heading into 2025. And if you're Devin Brown, somebody who's a former, I think a top 50 recruit for us back in the day, started 1 game in his career. It was an unfortunate start for him. It was in a bowl game. He got hurt basically immediately. But he's somebody that Ohio State thought highly of. He was the backup for Kyle McCord and Will Howard the last 2 years. And if you're Cal, you had to get a guy. You lost Fernando Mendoza to the portal, a really underrated quarterback nationally, somebody that NFL scouts view as a potential NFL player, looking towards, I guess, the 2026 draft at this point. And they got a West Coast kid to come home, and they also added a quarterback from Oregon, a high 4-star recruit from the 2025 class who immediately entered the portal. So Cal's quarterback room certainly saw a talent upgrade, and I think Devin Brown will be really good for them next year.
We talk a lot about players, but coaches too, staffs change, people move on somewhere because the staff they were on was fired. But the reaction when Baylor was able to get Paul Gonzalez, the cornerbacks coach at TCU, to come, 65 to 80 miles south, was in some ways what? Because he'd been there so long. And A great pickup for them from all indications. 2 high school coaches in the area that were on the TCU staff that went to that deep run. Joe Gillespie and also Josh Creech were like, they didn't know. And they were really surprised that Baylor was able to get Paul Gonzalez. What are you hearing about how important that pickup might be and the fact they got a commitment today who's a corner?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. Paul Gonzalez is a really well-respected coach in Texas. Obviously, has been at TCU for a long time, preceding Sonny Dykes' time there, dating back to his time with Gary Patterson. And like anytime you can snatch an important part of a staff away from a rival, it's a pretty big win. And you saw Baylor do that with Paul Gonzalez. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for TCU moving forward and for Baylor. But I think it's a really nice pickup for the Bears. Paul Gonzalez has obviously had a lot of success in his career. Is definitely tied in with the state and can help Baylor kind of in an area that at times they struggled the last couple of years.
Do you think Notre Dame's lost some guys, obviously, in the offensive line, and they felt comfortable, with the guys that they have? Do you think that they'll get aggressive maybe in the spring window, especially when they figure out if it's C.J. Carr or Steve Angeli who's probably leading that quarterback race?
Yeah, I think Notre Dame is more selective when it comes to the portal for the most part. I think they only took 8 players this last cycle, and all 8 of them ended up being starters or significant contributors. And that's kind of how they roll. They're going to be a developmental first program. I think what you're seeing the last couple of days is more illustrative of how difficult it is to keep quality depth in this era. They obviously, a couple of the guys that left today were legitimate starters, but they have younger players that were pushing them. And when people come back healthy, that lineup would look a little different. So I think you're seeing that stress being put on even a program like Notre Dame with the tradition they have, a really successful NIL program. It's just challenging to keep your depth in place. And yeah, I mean, I could maybe see Notre Dame adding an offensive lineman in the spring, add to that room. I could see them maybe taking a defensive tackle in addition to what they have. But they have a really strong transfer class as it is, including somebody in Malachi Fields at receiver from Virginia. I think is one of the steals of the portal cycle. So they've quietly done good work over there.
Chris, Ohio State tackle George Fitzpatrick signs with K-State. So another nice dude that enters the Big 12. You say he's the highest rated offensive lineman available in the portal. How good is he?
Well, he's only played, I think he played 66 snaps this year, so we'll find out. Kansas State needs him to be very good based on what they're paying him. But yeah, I mean, he's somebody with a lot of upside. They lost their right tackle to Oregon this transfer cycle. It was a pretty big, not Oregon, I'm sorry. They lost their right tackle to, I think maybe Washington, one of the West Coast schools. So they had to make a replacement there. They had to get better at tackle, and George Fitzpatrick was one of the last big chess pieces on the board. So it's a really nice addition for the Wildcats. And that's a team that really, Kent State lost a lot in the portal this year. I think they lost 24 scholarship transfers or something like that. So they had to get more aggressive, and they certainly did it so with George Fitzpatrick.
Chris, how much of a splash do you feel like Texas Tech has made? Obviously a splash there near the top of the rankings when it comes to the transfer portal. I know there was the murmurs about them getting involved in Carson Beck for that 24-hour period. But they've made a lot of noise here, haven't they, early on?
Yeah, so the Carson Beck stuff with Texas Tech was inaccurate. It just wasn't going to happen, didn't happen. I don't know why they got lumped in there. Maybe it's because of the way they've been spending. But I mean, in terms of a splash, it's a cannonball size splash. They have really attacked the transfer portal. They spent a lot of money in the transfer portal. I think if I was going to slot the Big 12 going into next year, I think they're a pretty clear favorite based on what they did in the transfer portal. So they had a window in terms of the merging of rev share and NIL. And the available funds. And I think they took really nice advantage of it. Did they overpay for a couple guys? Maybe, but you can afford to right now. And they got a lot of really good players. So that roster is significantly improved. And I think what did Tech go this year? 8-4 anyway. They were a couple defensive stops away from the Big 12 championship. So that roster doesn't have too far to go.
So I saw this post from Matt Zenitz, and you reposted it. But do you ever type something like this, or do we have to sometimes stop and go, wait a minute, what did I just type? And I read it. Old Dominion center Mike Flores is committed to Louisville. His agents, blah, blah, and blah, blah, tell Chris Hummer and me. Do you sometimes have to check yourself because of the fact you say his agents?
A year ago, yes. Now, no. It's just part of the landscape at this point. Players have representation and they play a role in the reporting process. So I think schools have gotten used to it. I think as a reporter, had to get used to it. We were not the first to kind of push that element of reporting, but once one person does it, you kind of have to jump in line. So it's a different universe, but given the power imbalance between players and schools for a very long time, it makes sense for players to have representation in this era. And I think the ones that have good representation are benefiting from it.
Question I have for you, and we all have sources, or we all have our way about going about doing our job. How much of your information comes from your text messages? How much of it either you sending out or vice versa checking, or even from players or their reps, or watching just the portal itself as it develops online?
I mean, I have a network of sources, and I like to think I can go in different places for what's needed.
Right.
So it just depends on the day and I guess the question that needs to be answered, I suppose. But yeah, you have to lean on a lot of people this time of year, for sure. A lot of text messages, a lot of phone calls, not a lot of emails, I guess. I can't think of the last time I emailed with a source, but phone certainly stays busy.
Can Carson Beck or will Carson Beck have the same impact that Cam Ward did at Miami? Or is their roster a little bit, I mean, there's no Martinez, no Fletcher, no Sam Brown, no Restrepo, no Arroyo, offensive lineman gone. Is that maybe not the same situation that Cam Ward's stepping into?
I mean, I think Cam Ward's going to be the number 1 overall pick in the draft, if not the number 2 pick, depending on like how you see Travis Hunter. So no, I don't anticipate Carson Beck having that kind of impact. I don't think he comes with quite that level of ceiling, but he's a very good player, and Miami had to get a guy. So they certainly filled that hole there. I think Miami will have one of the best offensive lines in college football next year. And given the way they operate, I have no doubt they will find a skill player or two in the spring portal window to add to their roster now that they have a quarterback in place. Although it is interesting that Carson Beck won't throw a football really until the summer. So that'll be interesting from a chemistry standpoint. But given the veteran nature of him and given Shannon Dawson's success, really basically every stop he's been at, like, I'm pretty confident they'll have an above average offense. I think if Miami wants to reach a higher ceiling next year, it's going to depend a lot more on the defense being better than the offense. You're going to have to see significant improvement on the other side of the ball.
Now that the season is officially over, it's never over because of what you do covering the portal, and not just that, but covering college football. Do you have a time that you take a deep breath for a weekend, or can you afford to do that right now?
I think it's slowed down maybe a tad the last day, maybe last couple days. But no, not a lot of time to breathe in this industry. And I'm sure it's the same for y'all. I mean,
Yep.
Spring ball's not too far away, and I mean, I'm not covering basketball like a lot of people are, but like plenty to do. And the portal really won't be done for another week or so. The coaching carousel cycle won't be done until mid-February, late February. And by that time, spring practice is already underway. And then you have spring practice, then you have the second portal window, and that's going to take you into June. And then you get maybe a month, and then it's media days already. So it's definitely a 12-month affair in college football these days.
All right, man. Good luck doing it. Appreciate that, Chris. Chris Hummer with us, 247 Sports, CBS Sports.